Welcome back to the Milione podcast. I have Sean again. I think he's probably going to be on the podcast a lot. We were actually talking before we came over here that we have to get some guests on, just like differing opinions, different life experiences, people older, people maybe even younger that are like, doing their own thing and just have conversations with them. I think it would be, not only beneficial to me, but just beneficial to listeners in general.
Yeah.
You.
I think, Marcus and I share a lot of the same perspectives. So having somebody else on who might share a different perspective, I think would be beneficial to you guys. And also, I'm sure there's a lot of cool people out there who do a lot of different things.
Definitely. I mean, we're in New York City, and it's filled with people, creatives, people running businesses, people much older than us that have seen great levels of success, stuff like that. So I think it would be fun to sit down, talk with them, hear their life experiences. But today's topic or topics are kind of revolving around work and life. We have burnout, work-life balance, kind of how to manage that. We have like when I knew it was time to quit my job, and kind of the same stuff I went through, Sean had to go through, deciding if he was going to take a risk with his own career and join me at Minted, New York, putting, his dreams of law school on the side. But before I get too far ahead of myself, I guess we'll just touch on burnout, work-life balance. I mean, I know for me, I have definitely dealt with burnout before, more so when I was trying to juggle both creating content, starting Minted, and working full-time. I remember hitting a point where I would look forward to quite literally getting to Saturday afternoon, Sunday, and sitting there doing nothing. Like all I wanted to do was have a break from my brain, like just thinking about so many different things. And it got to that point, and I started to get worried because, like, how do you bounce back from wanting to not have to go through the day-to-day and just be looking forward to times when you don't have to think anymore? I had no idea, but I knew that, like, that was the beginning of something's going to have to change, or we risk running ourselves into the ground.
Yeah, and for those of you who may not know, like, what burnout is, it's essentially, at least in our brains, kind of like you are super passionate about something at one point in your life, and then you do it so much, you do it at crazy hours, you kind of start losing the fulfillment it gave you, when you first started and you were so interested in it. And it's dangerous because it can be a slippery slope, and it can lead to a lot of other issues in life, like mentally, physically, and we'll kind of touch on some of that stuff. But I think for both of us, our first instance of burnout was kind of lacrosse.
Oh, my God.
That was like where we first experienced it.
Yeah, for me, probably toward the end of my sophomore year of college. And I don't know if it was me losing my love for the sport, or more so me not wanting to be in like a toxic environment. Like, I didn't like the way one of my coaches was coaching, specifically me, but how he treated just players in general. And it made going to practice so dreadful that I remember driving to practice and being like, I could crash the car and I wouldn't have to go to practice, and that'd be worth it. And those are the times where you have to realize, I need to seek a professional to help work me through this, because this is not good. It should not ever reach this point.
Yeah, and I think Mark's had a pretty serious case of burnout where there was a lot of other things going on. For me, it was more or less in high school. I kind of got sick of lacrosse, got burnt out, and then took a step back, and I actually rekindled the flame a little bit. I committed to play Division I in college, and then, freshman year was tough, but then I started making friends, and I actually fell in love kind of with the idea of being around my friends and playing lacrosse in that way. I'm not so sure I was like obsessed with the sport like so many of my other teammates were. But, you know, I wasn't afraid to vocalize that. They knew that. Like, I liked lacrosse because it was physical. It was something for me to do. But I really liked, you know, the people I was with more.
And I think that's a good point. Like, you are allowed to be extremely passionate about something, but not have it be who you are. Like, I think people run into issues, especially in sports. Like, yes, you can play sports at an extremely high level in college, and you can have it consume a lot of your life, but you can still maintain your own identity. When you wrap your identity up in your sport, and then that sport inevitably ends, you know, very small percentage of people go on to play their sport professionally and or make a living playing their sport professionally. When that ends, then you are now in the real world, and I remember reading posts from people that had played sports and like they lost their sense of identity and like had to go through an entire process of getting that back. And it was a multi-year process post-graduation and into the real world where they were dealing with who am I now that I don't have this sport as my identity.
Yeah, in a way, it's kind of like reverse burnout. Like we were burnt out of the sport. They wish the sport could have lasted forever. They wish they could have, like those were the things they looked forward to, those practices, those games. Whereas I think for Marcus and I, you know, we kind of dreaded practice. You know, we enjoyed games, I think, but for the most part, but, you know, practice, it didn't necessarily like do anything crazy for us.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like a chore. And like I said, I just did not want to be there. I was never just going to skip or like that's not part of who I am, but I had to pretty much just build like mental models in my head to find ways to enjoy, you know, practice and get through it. I knew that there was an end date. And I think for a lot of people that experience burnout, there is no hard set end date. So it feels like it could potentially just go on for the rest of their life. I knew that at the end of senior year, it was done. I never had to put on pads. I never had to go to practice. I never had to have a coach telling me what to do day in and day out and where to be. And so I knew that it ended if I could just get through those days.
Yeah. And I think the interesting here, because I think the next thing we're going to talk about is, you know, what causes burnout and like what can add to this, like why you can start feeling like you hate what you're doing. And Marcus's, you know, is interesting. He talked about his coach, and mine is totally different. Like I liked my coaches, I liked all my teammates, I liked all that stuff. It was just the idea of lacrosse that I didn't like, and like I was looking forward to doing something on my own and being solo and working towards my own goal where, you know, your schedule doesn't rely on somebody else. You don't have somebody hovering over you. I was just ready to kind of be independent.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times I think people probably in a college athletics can avoid burnout a little bit by taking, you know, more time to themselves during the summers and stuff. And I think we were always trying to play catch up, like skill wise or athletic wise, that we felt that like pretty much every single summer was dedicated to just trying to improve. It was multi-hour, like 3 or 4 hours a day, every single day between gym and being on the field and conditioning, and just to try to gain back whatever gap, like close the gap between like the really good players and just, you know, being average. And I think, you know, practicing in the summer and stuff, like we're together, we're back home, much more enjoyable. But I think there was no mental break for us. Like it was always counting down the days to when you had to show up and like fall conditioning started and you knew you had a long winter ahead of you before the season even started, cold practices, cold conditioning. And so it all just compounds and you're trying to put it off in your mind on top of you're dealing with just general stuff that people are dealing with from 18 to 21 years old.
Yeah. I mean, on top of it, like you have internships a lot of the time, you know, you're working in the summer. But I remember like all of those things, those internships really should have been the most important part of my summers because like that's kind of where I saw myself going career-wise. But it it really hyper focuses on lacrosse. You know, you had so much anxiety over it. It would be July and you'd be like, oh my gosh, we go back August, you know, middle of August. I'm counting down the days. Like, and looking back on it, it's crazy because, you know, the pressure and the constant fear of like not performing well or going back out of shape always hung over your head. And all of that, all of those things, that's why you burn out.
Yeah. And I talked about it in like a couple seconds ago about seeking professional help. I mean, I know a lot of college campuses, especially, you know, they'll have a whole separate section for athletes of sports psychiatrists, sports therapists, like stuff like that. And I had that at my disposal. It was good. I think that you don't even have to reach the stage of burnout or wanting to quit your job or whatever. I think in general, talking to somebody who objectively has no ulterior motive in your life but to try and get you better and get you in a good headspace is probably one of the best things that you can do. I've been to therapy ever since I was really young, you know, going back. Like, I haven't been in a really, really long time, which is good because, you know, we're in a good headspace now. But going back to when I was like young and hitting puberty and all of that, I think it taught me that therapy is good. Therapy is okay. And I get that there's this kind of a stigmatism around it in the general public. But, yeah, I mean, you have to do what is good for you. And, you know, instead of turning to a kind of like divisive and potentially harmful way of coping, talking to someone can help a lot more and leave you off better.
Yeah. I mean, they're professionals. They're there for you. And I mean, after that first session, after that first session, you have this idea of like what therapy is. And like, you're like, oh, this person went to therapy. Like, what's wrong with them? Mm-hmm. And then you go and you're like, oh my gosh, it's really just like talking to somebody who, you know, knows what they're doing and can help you through whatever you're dealing with. And then sessions after that are so much easier. Like, I feel like it's really that first session that there's a lot of unknown that you're walking into, and that's why people can get scared.
Yeah, I mean, I think whether people want to admit it or not, knowing you have to go in there and address stuff that you've been putting off and kind of maybe just like running from is a big deterrent for a lot of people, because they're like, well, now I'm going to be forced to reckon with whatever it is that might be like stirring up inside of me. And I also think that for a lot of people in like corporate life or just general working day to day, the presence of social media doesn't help at all. I think it's incredibly toxic to like work culture, mainly because Instagram, the biggest platform, essentially when I was growing up, when you were growing up, was built on the idea of hyper curation and showing the best parts of everybody's lives. And what ends up happening is that you have people who maybe they have achieved a great level of success while they were young. Maybe they were lucky enough to be born into an extremely affluent family, and they were able to post about all these experiences and material things. And then, soon enough, you have people just trying to do regular stuff, you know, like go climb the corporate ladder or work a normal job like 99% of people, and they start to compare themselves to, well, why don't I have those things? Or I can't even afford X, Y, and Z. When in reality, neither can the people that are posting them unless they are kind of self-made. It just becomes a very toxic cycle of, well, how can I be doing more? Or why aren't I not doing more? Why am I not making more money? Why am I not, you know, driving flashy cars? Stuff like that.
Yeah, and then this just leads to burnout, like we're saying. Like, if you see somebody who's young doing all of this stuff and you just are like, oh, it's achievable for them, why can't I just grind until I can achieve it? And then next thing you know, you're doing things you don't even like doing because you're chasing this goal that you're not even sure is like a dream of yours. And there you have it. Like 5 years later, you look back on it and you're like, what am I doing here? You know, why did I have to put this extreme amount of pressure to achieve these goals that here I am now, maybe even you didn't even get there. And then you look back on it and they're gone. Those years are gone.
Another thing is people's perception of what they want is always changing, right? So you could be an 18-year-old and going through college, and all you want is to make a lot of money, and then you end up in something like finance or investment banking, and you are working 80 to 100 hour weeks every single week, and everything else in your life kind of goes by the wayside because you're chasing after this goal of money and success and like that whole bit. And then 2 years in, a year in, you realize like, well, maybe this isn't what I want. Maybe I have been programmed to think this way, and maybe I'm more creative than I thought, or maybe I want to be doing something in the arts, and then you run into like an existential crisis of I'm making all this money, but if I quit, I'm gonna have to restart to chase like a quote unquote passion or something that I'm finding more fulfilling, and so you're stuck, and then you start to dread work and hate work, and now you are at a crossroads in your life of now I have to decide what actually is more important. Is the money and climbing the ladder and doing this for another 40 years, even if I hate it every single day, worth it? Or is me plotting a way out feasible so that I am in a better mental headspace and like day-to-day life is more enjoyable and more fulfilling?
Yeah, I've noticed there's always like two types of people you meet. One is like they made it. They're on the outside. They're very successful and they've climbed the corporate ladder. And you know, they went to, you know, who knows, like law school or med school. And then they'll be like, don't do it. Don't go do it. Like, yeah, it's not worth it. Like, yeah, I make a lot of money, but it's not worth it. And then on the flip side, you have, you know, those people where they did all that. And then very early on, or maybe even a little later on, 3 to 5 years into it, they said, I can't do this anymore. They dropped out and became successful in another way. And those types of people are very interesting as well because, you know, they have a totally different story. They were there at one point, and it just shows that, like, those jobs, those, you know, the corporate, like, climbing the corporate ladder, it's not for everybody.
And I think society does a pretty poor job at driving home the idea that you can make a lot of money going an untraditional route. You know, it involves, I think, inherently a bit more risk than taking the corporate ladder, trying to climb to like an executive level. Like that'll take, you know, a bit longer, and it's a lot more risky to try to do and build something yourself. But it is possible. You know, I think especially in the age of technology that we're in, you know, how many young kids have you seen across like news media outlets that have built a software company, and then by 30 years old they're worth 9 figures? You know, like I don't think you're gonna hit majority of people aren't gonna hit 9 figures if you climb to the executive level anyway, you know.
Yeah, and I think the key difference is that there's very much like a path for the, you know, getting to that executive level. For the person who, you know, creates the software, creates something, sells it for millions of dollars, there's no, like, you can't go read a book. You can read a book on how to, you know, be an entrepreneur and that, but nobody's going to give you the ideas. Nobody's going to do that sort of thing. While vice versa, you have people, you go to school, you go to college, you go, if there's more college ahead, you do that. You know, there's a path. People have done it and you can follow in the footsteps.
Yeah. I think that post like graduation and kind of on the whole like topic of burnout, I experienced a second round of I wouldn't say burnout, but just like kind of similar to burnout in the sense of extremely high anxiety and extremely just like, yeah, I guess high anxiety was when we were hitting the tipping point between quitting my job and working full time. So for 8 months of Minted New York, as we are growing and going through kind of a ton of growing pains, just trying to scale, I was still working full time. And that wasn't just like strict 9 to 5 hours. I was still putting in a great deal of hours at the bank. And it hit a point where there are two things we put in, kind of one I noticed, and then we put something else in place to give an incentive to you can quit your job at this point. What the quit your job at this point was I sat down with my dad and we decided that we were going to come up with a revenue goal number. And if we hit the revenue goal number every month for 3 months, then it was time to quit. Well, the next month comes and we hit all 3 months in 1 month. So that was, one of the boxes checked. The other one being I was waking up at night, cold sweats, heart palpitations, was cramping my calves because I was so stressed in my sleep. And I was clenching my calves. I have a tendency to do that when I'm stressed. And that's when I know when stress is a bit high and we need to take a step back. And cold sweating the bed, like that's another indicator for me. It always happens. I think it's because my subconscious is like fighting things. But Sean pretty much witnessed all of this. He was still working extremely long hours, working not even a normal job, like an extremely grueling job. And he saw pretty much me have to work through this entire process. Like he has the benefit and the, what's the opposite of benefit? You had the luxury and the bad side of like living with me while trying to do this, because I think there was no one for me to even talk to it about except for Sean. So he was on the receiving end of like all of my crazy ideas and all of the stuff where I was going through the whole time. But he saw the build up to a point where it was just not sustainable anymore.
Yeah, it's really interesting looking back on it because, I was working. Marcus was work from home, and I at that point, when things started picking up with Minted, I was going into the office, and I would leave early, and I would work late, and I would stay in the office. So I would catch these very small glimpses of like what was going on, and it made it hard because one, like I didn't know if he was like I could obviously tell he was very stressed, like Marcus was stressed, and but I had no idea why. I had no idea what was happening because by the time I got home, Marcus would generally be asleep. Because he gets up so early, like compared to me, and he goes to bed earlier. So like I would get home, he'd be asleep, so we wouldn't talk. And then in the morning, we would go to the gym together, and that was like the only time we saw each other. So like I see stressed. I don't really know how to help. Because clearly, like I still had so much work to do that I couldn't really help. Like I was busy, and then, it can take a toll because when that happens, you can start to get on each other, and you don't know why. So I think our relationship obviously is great, but like during that period, it was just a little bit harder because we live together. We're in a small apartment. We're on top of each other. And there's just a lot of stress with him, stress from my job, knowing that I was leaving soon, and then what my next steps were with studying and, full-time studying, not having an income. There was a lot of layers.
Yeah. I mean, Sean would help with some of the releases that we were still able to do from the apartment. So he'd get a glimpse then, but I think a lot of people don't understand that Sean was working pretty close to 65 to 80 hours every single week. So, I mean, while the money was good, yeah, I mean, that's taking a toll on him too. Like, you really can do nothing during the week. Majority of the time was logging in on the weekends to clean stuff up or try to get ahead or just general, stuff to help make his week a bit easier. But he was coming home not like 8 p.m. was a good day, and then if it was extremely busy, 1, 2 in the morning, and I would see him, like you said, at the gym. So we both had like a lot of different things going on, and then it just hit a point where I couldn't do it anymore. I mean, he had a hard stop, so lucky, I guess, in that sense to some degree. But for me, I remember sitting in my chair thinking, I can't do this for 40 more years. Like, I'll go crazy if I don't find a way out to be able to, do my own thing and work for myself. But then there's stresses with that decision, no paycheck every 2 weeks, no 401k match, no employer health care plan, the possibility of it literally blowing up in your face and you're left with nothing and or potentially debt depending on how you're structuring the finances of the business. And so then those start to weigh on you, like, oh, can I hold on any longer to this every 2 week paycheck to, cover rent and all the other stuff? Like, how's it going to work? And I think I'm lucky in the sense that our dad was a pretty big risk taker at the beginning of his life, with his whole story before getting into government work. And yeah, I remember talking to him and he was like, you don't have anybody relying on you. You have no wife. You have no kids. You don't even have a girlfriend. Like, you don't have a mortgage. If all else fails, you just start over. So who cares? You're young. You have time on your side. But I mean, there's stress on both sides of that decision. And ultimately, happy I made the decision I made.
Yeah. And, I think what helped you a little bit, like finally making that decision is like, Mark's had a great relationship with the people at the bank. So, he didn't know before they quit that, like, he could go back. But he knew that, like, he still has that. It's not like he loses all of that experience and, like, nobody would hire him again. But, yeah, I remember him toying with the idea of, like, he kept saying, like, oh, like, I want to quit so bad. I want to quit so bad. And I was just like,
I would say it every day.
I was like, and he would literally say it every day, and it would get annoying. But I was also in the back of my head, I was like, you're not gonna quit. Like, he's not gonna quit. Like, I just never really thought he was going to quit because he liked that steady check every 2 months or every 2 weeks, where it helps fund the business because it's extra cash, and Minted was relatively small, and that extra cash can go a long way. So he liked that. So I was like, there's no way he's gonna leave. But then, after I actually left my previous job and like saw everything and saw that it was growing the way it was growing, I think I was just finally like, all right, maybe quitting might be better. Like, there's no reason for you to put all this stress on you if you have enough money with Minted to not like kill yourself every day.
Yeah. Sean also comes from a place of like, he's been hearing me talk about, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to have a business since I was like 16 years old. I've been telling everybody in my family that. Like, I've always been very adamant since I was extremely young. This is what I'm going to do. Like, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to have a business. So for him to hear me say like, oh, I'm going to quit is just one of those like things he's been hearing since, forever. So for it to like eventually come to a head and me actually, pull the trigger on doing it probably was a bit of a surprise for him, but ultimately probably more of a surprise for him, the fact that he was a couple months down the road going to be giving up law school to go and work for Minted full time.
Yeah. And that decision alone, I mean, we talked about like stress, anxiety, this decision, I guess, since it's currently what I've decided and I'm working for Marks now, you give up law school. I studied for the LSAT. I did all of that stuff. I think I've spoken about that. And you kind of are worried because it's not like a traditional thing you can put on your resume. And like, as I've grown up and, my internships and the jobs I've worked and all of that stuff, it was kind of just building this resume, very professional, and like, and not saying Minted isn't professional, but it's just very like not traditional.
Corporations don't look at it as professional.
Yeah, like
I get it.
Not even like in a bad way. It's just like you're kind of just
you worked on your brother's project.
like yeah,
that's how they look at it.
And if you can't like, you don't send in this is a legitimate company, it made this much with your resume, like you can't send in like the financials. So if they haven't heard of it, like you're kind of just shit out of luck. So that's kind of like the biggest thing for me is knowing that right now it's a big risk, but I'm 24 years old. I have plenty like my resume, I'm confident in my resume already. And I'm also confident that now I can put Minted on my resume and it will be legitimate. It's like, it is legitimate. So because if this goes according to Marx's master plan, then it's totally worth it. And there's nothing better than like working with your brother. I mean, it can be a little more stressful, but at the same time, like not many people get to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I've told Sean, like, especially even going into the decision, I always told him it's 100% your decision. I don't want to have any influence on it. But if this goes how I have it planned out in my head, you'll never have to work again. And that's pretty much how I laid it out. Now, he's taking a pretty big bet on me. He's taking a bet on us and if we can grow it to that level. But you know what? Like, you only, the saying is cliche, but you only live once, and the ability to work together when you're extremely young, setting your own schedule, setting your own pace, doing things how you want them done, not answering to anybody, is an extremely freeing feeling. And it's a segment that I wanted to bring up, is just like transitioning from corporate, structured, rigid deadlines to being an entrepreneur. And I think it's an equal amount of work, just a different type of work. I know for me, I'm always on. I'm always thinking about product, how to optimize the business, what we can be doing better, different stuff. And while it might not be in a very physical, traditional corporate work, like, you know, paperwork, or you have tangible things to show for your work, it's very much something I'm always nonstop thinking about 24/7. I don't think it turns off.
Yeah, I think like a huge difference is like there's no bureaucracy. Like if there's a problem, if there's something that needs to be done, like you just address it, and there's no going through hoops. There's no getting approval.
There's no HR.
Like there's no, like, it's just me and Marcus. Like it's just like we're just brothers, and like I help out and do all this stuff. And I mean, like, if the way we interact is just very different than, you know, what I was used to, and I'm sure what was totally different than when Marcus was at the bank. But it's fun. And, you know, I think one of the most fun parts is that, you know, Marcus and I are very much the same person, like working out, running, blah, blah, blah. And so, like, you know, we always build into our schedule. Like, we'll go work out, like, around, like, I don't know, it depends, like 11 o'clock. And then people are always like, do you guys work or stuff like that? And it's
like, I've been working since 4:30 this morning, man.
Yeah, it's just like you can do that if, you know, you don't have a ton of employees underneath you that, like, you all kind of have to be on the same schedule where, like, you're easily
at your
accessible
desk all the time. Yeah.
It's just like, if I know when he's not easily accessible because I can look at him. So
yeah,
it's fun.
I mean, yeah, I mean, like, the whole perfect scheduling thing has been a major blessing, especially now that we've kicked up our training so hard with the running, and how it uses a bit more time. But I mean, I know for me personally, I do my best work in the morning. That's why from 4:30 to whatever time we end up at the gym, maybe a run in between there, is my time to bang out. Any creative stuff is generally going to come in the morning. So creative stuff, get that out of the way. Emails and back end of the business stuff gets taken care of. And then anything after the gym is generally when I will schedule in-person stuff, meetings with the manufacturer, stuff that we have to physically go do, because I know that if I have this stuff that needs to be done on the computer hanging over my head, it will cause stress. So finding, like, if you are an entrepreneur, or maybe you are thinking about being an entrepreneur, and you're listening to this and it's like, well, how do I build a schedule? I think it's very much situational and dependent on the individual. Like Sean's schedule, there's no way it would ever look anything like my schedule, because he just does not like to do work early in the morning, and he is very much going to put in longer hours at night while I'm asleep.
Yeah, it's always how it's been. Like, Marcus gets up and he, like, can get right up. His alarm goes off, he gets right up. My alarm goes off, I snooze it like 6 times.
I hear it every morning.
Like, my eyes burn. But, like, when it gets to, you know, later in the night, Marcus kind of is just like, oh, I need to go to bed. And that's when I have, like, the most energy. So it's kind of good, because it's nice because we kind of get a break from each other. Like he gets that whole morning, like from 4 to whatever it is to whenever I wake up, to be like completely alone with his thoughts. And then I get the nights where I can just be in my room. I can just, be by myself, which is good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, also like just one thing that we had to work through recently was, since we live and work in the apartment, we don't have a physical office yet. It's something that we're definitely going to end up getting. It's just like not a right time or place right now. Just got a warehouse, like stuff like that. We needed a way, instead of just like yelling back and forth to each other, and talking about things, like every organization that I've ever seen has like an instant messaging system. And so that's something we realized, even though we are literally 5 feet apart from each other, we needed to put like a Slack. We installed Slack and put that into like place so that we could just IM and not interrupt workflow with talking. I think it was ultimately, before it was implemented, it became a point of like almost stress, because I'm very much, if I'm thinking about something and somebody starts talking or it's audibly interrupted, I have to restart that thought and start all the way back and walk through the steps that I might have been in the middle of. And so just having the Slack there makes it so much easier to just ping somebody, ping Sean, ping Clay, and be like, hey, when you get a chance, or what do you think of X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, because and it's known, like Clay knows, and like Marcus and I know that like you throw a message in Slack, it's not like an immediate urgent thing. Like if it's urgent, then you'll get a call or something like that. You throw it in Slack, and it's kind of just like people like Marcus, Clay, or I like throwing ideas around, or just like responding to people's ideas, or like Clay's working on something late at like night in the studio and he just like throws it in there, and then we can look at it, and it's cool. It's like it creates like a team environment, because with emails it's just like very formal, and sometimes you just want to like throw in like something small you're working on, or just like you have a general question about how things work, you throw it in there. You don't disrupt their workflow. They read it. They respond when they need to.
Yeah, I mean, even this morning, Clay was sketching up stuff last night late in the studio. I think I was already asleep, and I was able to respond to it this morning. And there's just what I like about it is there's just it's almost like a collective brain of an organization, because everybody is in the general chat, I guess, on Slack. So you can read through, even though Sean isn't heavily involved in the design aspects of certain things, he can read the back and forth between Clay and I and start to get a better understanding of how we're looking at these specific pieces, or what we're looking at, or what might be able to be changed. And it's a learning thing for him. Whereas when Sean and I are talking about the business stuff, Clay's picking up on, well, this is how to actually run a brand, because I know the kid wants to run a brand someday. So like, and I always try to be as transparent as possible with how things are being run. And, I like the collective brain analogy, because you can learn a lot from just reading what other people are talking about.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know, a lot of you probably know Clay, but he, like, the way he talks about designs and like references design work, and like the different like fabrics and all of this stuff, and like what goes into it. I'm not a designer. I have no idea what like how design works. And so reading up on it, you just kind of, you get an appreciation also for how much goes into like something that seems so simple. Like you have this idea, but how does that idea come to life? How can, this idea of a concept of we want to create this product, and then Clay will be like, okay, well, there's this, and this that go into that. And I'm like, you could have given me 100 guesses and I wouldn't have guessed anything about those things. So
yeah. I also think that comes into like playing into everybody's strength. Like I've talked about it before. I can't spell for shit. And so Sean proofs a lot of the stuff, important stuff that gets sent out or gets put on the website, stuff like that. And he's very detail oriented like that, managing inventory numbers, handling all of the customer support stuff. Like I'm very much not I don't enjoy that level of that type of work, and I like to be the person looking down at like the chessboard and moving the big pieces of this is the direction we need to go. And it's nice to have someone like Sean to compliment and, you know, do the work in actually getting that piece there. I know where it needs to go, and then he does the work to get there. And then you have somebody like Clay who sees design so well, and he's so much more versed in, especially, you know, shoes, and we're working on a mule right now. Like, the way he looks at things is a way I wouldn't look at things, Sean wouldn't look at things. So just playing into his strength and like letting people have the freedom to do their job, and understanding that I'm good at what I'm good at, but there are things that everybody else is better at, so I'm just going to let them take it and run with it and not even really try to put my hand too much in the pot.
Yeah, and I think that was something that I definitely struggled with when I first came on board, because, you know, Marcus would slowly give me more responsibilities as I was learning how things worked. And then it was just kind of like I didn't want to make a mistake, so like I would ask as many questions as I could. But then, you know, looking back on it now, it was more like you also have to have the faith that like, or the confidence that you're good enough at what you're doing to like be able to not have somebody hover over you. So, you know, eventually Marcus and I talked where he was like, look, like, I trust you. If you have a question and like you think you know the answer, you probably do. Just do it. Like, you don't have to you don't have to ask me. It's not going to be the end of the world if you mess up something. Like, obviously, if it's not anything crazy. But so that was kind of like a big learning curve for me, because at my previous job, it was very much like I always wanted to check in with, you know, the lawyers, and it's totally different there because, you know, they're lawyers. They have that extra schooling. But now it seems like we've worked through that, and it's been a little more, I don't know, seamless.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'll give you a task to do unless I believe that you can do it. And I have in the past gotten frustrated when it's seemingly almost common sense, you know, type things. Like, I gave you this task because I didn't want to be dealing with it. Like, trust yourself and do the right thing. And obviously, you know, there are times to ask me how to do things, especially when it comes to like maybe a specific customer experience or customer interaction, or like how do I navigate a really upset customer who, you know, either the product was messed up or something, and that, you know, that is one of those things where, yeah, Sean's going to have to ask me, and he's going to learn once, and then he's going to realize that I handle all the situations pretty much the same, so that he can then apply that same, you know, situation to ones in the future, and just always make sure that customer's taken care of, and, you know, do what's right for the business. But at the end of the day, customer experience is more important to me than sometimes the bottom line of the business.
Yeah. It's just
it goes against traditional like business sense / schooling, I think, which is something I had to like break you out of.
Yeah. And it was also like the idea that, you know, it comes back on the business, but then that business also comes back to Marcus. So it's like, if I mess something up, you know, I don't want it to get back to like Marcus in a way. But now I very much understand how like the process works, and no issues as of yet.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing. Like, there will be issues down the road. Like, how we handle it is going to be kind of important to the success of the business, because you just have to be able to take things in stride and professionally. We talked kind of off topic here.
Yeah, we got a little bit on a tangent.
But I mean, just in stress in general, some things that Sean and I have implemented in our lives that help manage stress. I don't think you can really eliminate stress unless you want to go be like a Buddhist monk maybe. But running, working out, general health and well-being, and it doesn't have to be running 9 miles a day. Like, I understand that that's something that's anybody really looks at as super enjoyable. Just getting out in the morning, maybe going for a walk, fresh air, while you're drinking your coffee or something before you start your day, and keeping your body moving. There are feel good endorphins that are released when you are walking around, moving your body in the gym, etc. For us, it's extremely important to clean the apartment. Keeping our workspace clean, very important, even more so like that we live in the space we work, which inherently causes me anxiety, but like it's something I just have had to deal with because it makes the most sense for the business right now. And eating right. Like you are what you eat because your cells are made up of pretty much the stuff you're putting into your body. So making sure that 80% of the time you're putting the right fuel in so that you can perform, you can function, you don't have brain fog, all very important. And I'm sure there's a bunch of other things we could be doing a lot better, but yeah, that helps manage stress. One big thing that I added recently is that huge whiteboard above my monitors. Like I got a pretty big whiteboard above my monitors, and I'm able to just grab my expo marker and just write down stuff as it comes to me. And so then it's there. I can take it out of my brain, put it there, and then it's one less thing to stress about remembering.
Yeah. And I mean, there are tons of different people do tons of different things to like de-stress themselves. We've just found that this works for us, but like it could be totally different for somebody else. And it's all about exploring things other than work and, what really makes you not think about work or whatever's stressing you out. And then once you find that out, try to just incorporate, if you can, a sliver into your day. And once you do that, you get a little bit of break, and then it can make your days feel like they split in half, or they have like a instead of just you wake up, you shower, you do whatever, work, you get home. And I can see why people get stressed, and I can see why I used to get stressed because that's somewhat how I felt. But yeah.
Well, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, would certainly appreciate a review. I don't know how the algorithm works for podcasts, but anything does help. So if you enjoyed the episode, I would appreciate a review, feedback. You can tell us things you'd like us to do differently always. If you're on YouTube, feedback in the comments always help. Subscribing always helps. I appreciate the people who do listen. It's been a lot of fun exploring this. I guess we're about a month in to making episodes every week. Like we said at the beginning, I think that we should definitely get guests on differing opinions, different lifestyle, different upbringing, and continue to just put out episodes. Yeah, thanks for listening, and we will be back next week.